Well, good morning. We are in chapter 13 of the Gospel of Mark for Bible study today. We have a few minutes. I want to talk to you a little bit about the nature of Bible study after today going forward. I noticed that chapter 14, 15, and 16 would work out well enough where we could do about half of each chapter each day, and we end up coming to a stop on chapter 16 on Easter 2. So Easter 1, we usually have a brunch, a youth group brunch, so we'll probably won't have Bible study on Easter Sunday. But the second Sunday of Easter, we can deal with chapter 16 of the Gospel of Mark, which is the resurrection narrative. So we'll deal with the passion of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark for the Sundays of Lent, and then we'll come into a landing spot on the resurrection account. So you'll notice that it kind of affects today a little bit, that today's study isn't terribly long, but that was intentional for those two reasons. And I also was a little worried with all the bells and all the different moving things this morning, if there would be enough time, how that was going to work with the voters meeting as well as other stuff. So with the breakfast as well. So I wasn't sure. I thought maybe keep it short just to be safe. We're going to deal with the last little bits then of chapter 13 and stop there and leave 14 for next week. I did want to make a point of mentioning as well, if you hadn't noticed, I did get name cards up for all of the paintings, and you'll notice a QR code for each one of them as well, so that you can scan that QR code, and for most of them, not every single one of them, but for most of them, there's actually a YouTube video that will take you through and explain the piece of art. So you could kind of do a little walking tour and have all of them explained to you. And by the way, just so you know, they are laid out in a specific layout of the life of Christ. So we start over here with the Annunciation, or basically the story before or during his conception. And then we move this way, so we have the Beatitudes, you have the Transfiguration, which happened today. That's our lesson for today. And then move over to here to, this is a story representing some of Jesus' teaching or his parables. And then we get to Garden of Gethsemane, and then crucifixion, resurrection, and post-resurrection stories there on your far left down there. So you can take a minute to look at them and look at some QR codes, and hopefully those are helpful to you as we do that. I have not yet dedicated those, or we have not yet dedicated them, because a member of the congregation gave a significant amount of money for them, and I haven't found a time where she was available to come and be part of Bible study to do that. So when we get her available, we will make sure to dedicate those pictures at some point. We are at chapter 13, verse 24 and following. We'll do these verses 24 through 27. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. So we just got done talking about the abomination of desolation, which, have any of you ever been to, this is going to be a silly question, but maybe someone has. Anyone ever been to Rome here? Has anyone ever been to the Arch in Rome? Okay, so inside the Arch are carved reliefs of the sack of Rome, a sack of Jerusalem, 70 AD. And the reason why you can really tell, Rome would do a lot of pictures and do a lot of frescoes of sacking of certain cities. The reason why you can tell it's Jerusalem is they're taking away things from Jerusalem, and one of the things they're taking away is the Great Menorah. And that's not something you'd find in any other city in the world. So it's pretty obvious the depiction of Titus sacking Rome in 70 AD. He was the Caesar at that time. Yeah, really cool picture, really interesting. That's the abomination of desolation. So we talk about that. That's a very specific point in history, right? It's like 70 AD. It's kind of happening. But then Jesus is going to pivot now and talk about things that can be interpreted in a variety of ways in these verses, okay? So I wanted to ask a quick question. If you are familiar with the idea of proleptic, this is a word that we kind of throw around at seminary, and it's a very Lutheran idea. Proleptic. Anyone know what that word means at all? I think we've talked about it in Bible study before. Proleptic would be a perspective of how we look at Scripture, or maybe we could say how we look at history. What is God doing with Jesus? Now we can say clearly that one perspective, or one way of looking at Jesus is the time has come, right? The travel in the Roman world is good. The situation is right. The canon of the Old Testament Scripture has become closed. Like, there's a lot of factors where we can say it's the right time for Jesus to come and to work out his ministry, which is to teach, to preach the Word of God, and eventually to die on the cross and rise from the dead. So it's obvious that this is, one way of looking at it. But you could also look at Jesus' ministry as proleptic. So imagine a world that you live in where God creates the world, and the prophets, and all the Old Testament happens, it unfolds like it does now. And the prophets come and they tell us all kinds of things about preparing for the end, but there's no Jesus. There's no ministry of Jesus as we know it. And there's still going to be an end. Okay? So when we get to the end, the final judgment of Christ, when he comes at the end, will we be prepared for that ending? Will we be prepared for Christ's judgment if Christ doesn't kind of come first? You can look at Christ's ministry then as a proleptic. He jumps into history before the event and prepares us for that event by showing us a myriad of things. And Jesus' miracles of giving sight to blind, making the lame walk, making the deaf hear, rising of people from the dead, these are all things that the Old Testament prophets talked about in the end times. Right? So Jesus' ministry can be seen as a proleptic, just as some of these events in Mark could be seen the same way. So let's take a look at it for a minute. How do we understand when Jesus says, he gives some categories here. Sun darkened, moon won't give light, stars falling from heaven, the powers of heaven shaken, sun on clouds, the elect gathered. How could we understand those things in the immediate context of post-crucifixion, post-resurrection life? What are some ideas there? I think you're going to find this really interesting. So, does the sun darken when Christ dies on the cross? Yes. Does the moon not give its light at the same time? Yes. So these things actually happen in the immediate context of Christ dying and rising again. Stars falling from heaven and the powers from heaven shaken. So what do you make of this? The powers of heaven, what are we talking about? Do you have any guesses? What are the powers of heaven? This is a little tricky. It has a lot to do with the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint. Very often angels are described as the powers of heaven. Okay? And oftentimes, too, angels are described as, there's like this kind of metaphoric language here going on. The angels are also stars in heaven, right? So we're talking about the falling of angels, the falling of stars. This is going to kind of blow your mind. What was on the curtain temple that was torn in half? Anyone know? Anyone remember from your Old Testament? What was on the curtain temple that was torn in half from top to bottom? Angels. Angels were all over the curtain temple. So there's some people who interpret Jesus saying, in the immediate context of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is talking here about the temple curtain being torn in two. Now, what does a temple curtain mean? What function or purpose does it serve? Talk a little bit more about that, Clint. What does it separate? Yes. And the temple curtain separates the holy place from the most holy place, right? The place where the great menorah are and the table of showbread and all these various furniture things from the Ark of the Covenant, or at least where it once was, right? That's where this temple curtain is. And that thing is torn down. So we understand that the temple curtain is a separation between God and man, between holy and unholy things. And when Christ pays the penalty for sin and he dies, why does the curtain get torn in half? because there's no longer any division between holy and unholy things, because he has made us holy. Now, we believe in a now and not yet. We are holy in our baptism. We are holy in the forgiveness of sins, and yet we still deal with sin. We'll talk a little bit about this a little further on in the study today, about why we still kind of live in this now and not yet. You know, because the idea of like when judgment comes and how we live until judgment comes, right? But so there's a idea to be taken here that perhaps the heavenly powers that are trembled, or the angels, the stars that fall from the sky, could be describing the temple curtain being torn in two. So now we're seeing like a kind of, do you see what I'm saying? There's an immediate context to it, to all these events. The sun on clouds. Sun on clouds. What would be maybe an immediate context in the Gospel of Mark itself? How does Jesus go up into heaven? In clouds, right? So there's immediate context there. And then this final one, right? The elect gathered. What do you guys think about that? Immediate context. The elect gathered to the stories and events of Jesus Christ. You're getting close. Thinking of an event. Starts with a P. Pentecost. What happens? All the people, there's a great rushing wind, and a bunch of people gather together from many different languages and many different cultures. And what do? They all hear the gospel proclaimed, right? So there's immediate context to all this. But at the same time, let's take a look at some of these events in a future context. So the sun darkened, we see that in Revelation 6:12. The moon will not give its light is in Revelation 6:12 as well. The stars falling from heaven, the powers from heaven shaken, Revelation 6:13, excuse me. Sun on clouds, that's like right away in Revelation 1:7. You see the sun coming on clouds. And then the elect gathered, well, Revelation 7, verses 9 through 17. So there's this very weird thing about prophecy that we understand, and maybe it'll be helpful for you as you kind of think about prophetic things in the future, is that we live in three dimensions, right? We have height, we have width, and we have depth, right? 4 dimensions will be living in height, width, depth, and also what? What's that 4th dimension? Time, right? So with height, width, and depth, you can specify where anything is at any given moment, but you can only live in one point in time, not every, right? So God lives in 4 dimensions. When he shows pictures or prophetic visions to people who are looking at them, the problem is that I think that they can become squashed together because of the nature of our vision, right? So is there a possibility that Jesus meant both of these things? And the reason why we're having a hard time understanding is because we see Revelation played out. We're only seeing it, and these things tend to, instead of being separate events, they squash together. We see them kind of almost back to back, or even the same thing. This is a problem with Revelation. Like, how does Revelation play out? Or Isaiah, for that matter. Isaiah talks about prophecies that take place in time. Like, for example, Israel is delivered by Cyrus the Great. But there's a possibility that Isaiah might mean more than just Cyrus the Great. He might mean the final deliverance that's given by God. And which one is which? Well, they kind of all get squashed together, and it's hard to tell them apart. They're both true. They're both things God is doing. They're both good, and they kind of fall into each other, and they look like the same thing when we look at them as sinful people. Yeah? So there's a kind of a cool thing here where I just think Mark is showing us, or Jesus is telling us things that happen both in the immediate context but also in the future. Yeah? Any comments or questions about any of that? Any thoughts? That's all? I wanted to help you to try to kind of understand some of these things because they are very cryptic, right? Like, after that tribulation, so after 70 AD, there will be, darkened moon and lights. And then, there's a mark sometimes you wonder if the tribulation is the death of Jesus or is 70 AD. And there's an argument to be made that it could be either one, right? So all these things are happening in time. What does it mean to be like what is the stars will be fallen from heaven, the powers of heaven will be shaken? What does that exactly mean? I think in the future, it has a sense of like when Jesus talks in Luke chapter 7, I believe it is, about St. Michael, and he says, "Behold, I saw the devil fall from heaven like lightning." And what he's talking about is when the disciples go out and preach the gospel, there is no way for the devil to exist in the heavenly realms anymore. In the book of Job, for example, and other places, he's there for some reason, and he's accusing people of their sin. But once Jesus' forgiveness goes out into the world, there's no longer an ability to accuse people of sin, so his job is obsolete. He just falls from heaven because there's no purpose for him to be there anymore, and he's not welcome, right? So, this final proclamation of the gospel and the hope of Jesus Christ, the heavenly lights, the stars, they're shaken and they fall. Interesting stuff. Any questions? Any thoughts going forward? Revelation stuff is always kind of hard to put it down exactly as what it is. So let's go through the lesson of the fig tree. Verse 28, from the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will not pass away. Okay. So the fig tree talks about fruit, but also it's an interesting thing about the fig tree that it puts out leaves. It's actually not that unusual. In Israel, though, when the fig tree puts out its leaves, you know that warm weather is coming. Right? That's something that people in Israel just know, right? So Jesus, I think, is making a comparison here. It's like, if you know this simple truth, that when the fig tree puts out its leaves, that you should prepare for warm weather, why is it, or perhaps why aren't you paying more attention to the signs in the world that would make you aware that something else is coming? Okay? So the question might be, will we heed signs or ignore them? What do you think? Will we heed the signs or will we ignore them? What kind of signs do you think? Jesus doesn't really specify what things to look for. He's saying that we should be aware of them, right? So I think we could go back to looking at some of the things in the verses prior to, but I don't think that list above is exhaustive. So what you know from Scripture and what you know from life, what kind of signs do you think a person should be maybe aware of to prepare and know the time and age they live in? Go ahead, Gail. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, hey, be aware of the signs, right? He's saying, so when you see these things taking place, these things, you know that he is near at the very gates, right? So he assumes that we understand that something's happening, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing with wars and natural disasters is that there's a lot of them throughout history. So it's very hard to pin those things down as to if they're authoritative or not. Like this is specific things are happening now. I think they are signs, though. Maybe signs in the sense that we should look at them and realize that our lives are mortal, and that this world is also mortal. It's not going to last forever, neither are we. So those signs should be clear to us. And then if we understand that we are mortal, that we won't exist forever and that the world won't exist forever, then perhaps we should take heed and prepare for the end, right? And maybe you kind of laugh at that, but I don't know if you've been paying attention. Just the other day, I saw an article talking about how they think that they can screen your plasma, take out old proteins, and it could greatly extend the length of your life. They're talking about being able to, Pastor Smith was telling me about, there's another study working on Alzheimer's and things on the brain. They think they're close to a cure on that. There are some people who believe that with artificial intelligence, once a true form of artificial intelligence is developed, that the progress of that computing system and its ability to change our lives will be rapid. So there's what was it like? They think within 9 years of true AI being built, pretty much all jobs will be obsolete, and then shortly thereafter they'll have cracked all the human genome things and be able to extend lives extensively. So we may not think that there are a lot of people out there who think that life is going to go on forever, this planet's going to go on forever, and your bodies are going to live forever, but there are a lot of people who actually do think that, right? So any kind of sign that shows us that we're mortal is not a bad one. It reminds us who we are and that we should be prepared for the last day, for our last day, whatever that might be. I think some of the more specific signs are persecution of the gospel. That should really maybe bring our ears up. And then the other one that Isaiah talks about a clear sign that the end is near, so to speak, like using that language, is when humanity not only like, so there's always this idea in the scriptures that humanity is going to do evil things and then hide from it, or keep it somewhere no one can see it, right? But a real sign in Isaiah that he talks about is, things are bad when people are doing evil and they're calling it good. They're redefining what evil is. And so they're calling all kinds of evil behaviors good. See, now that's kind of where we are in spades right now, where we're redefining almost every sinful or bad behavior as good, and that's when we have trouble. You can kind of rationalize and say almost anything is okay. That's troubling. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't think he would mention them if they weren't real and they weren't going to happen. Right? Why would he bother mentioning if they? Yeah. So definitely, and we'll be able to recognize them for sure. The only problem with sometimes signs is that, like Gail was mentioning, is that they are similar throughout history, so it's hard to discern which one is which. I think we as Lutherans would be very careful to get into the whole, we can determine when Christ is going to come. We shouldn't do that. Because as Jesus says in the very next day, right? But concerning the day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father, right? So I found this fun little thing here, just to give you a sense of it. So AD 66, the Essenes believe that they predicted prior to that the end of the world would be in 70 AD. Pope Sylvester II predicted that the end of the world would be when the clock turned over to 1000. This was like 999, and then when the calendar turned over to 1000, they were convinced that the world would end, and of course that was wrong. Then this is a funny one. Pope Innocent III, he believed the world would end in 1284 because that's 666 years after the founding of Islam. So 1254 is 666 years after Islam was founded. Okay, this is a pope. This is not like, some guy wherever. Pat Robertson, of course, famously predicted that the world would end in April 29, 2007. I think in April 29, 2007, I was in Germany, if I remember correctly. I can't, somewhere in that. May 21st, 2011. This was when I was a brand new pastor. I had been a pastor for a year and a half. Harold Camping. Remember Harold Camping? he predicted the rapture would happen on October 21st. And then, May 21st first, and then later on October 21st, and both were wrong, and nothing happened, right? I think he predicted it here it is. He predicted the end of the world on September 6th, September 29th, October 2nd, and March 31st. 6 incorrect apocalypse predictions. I can't believe anybody would still listen to him. It's crazy. And then David Meade was the most recent big one. I think actually someone just this year, though, was predicting the world was going to end. I can't remember who that one was, but David Meade thought it would happen on September 23rd, 2017. And these guys have all kinds of different ways in which they calculate days because of dates and times and numbers they find in Revelation and all kinds of other places. I would probably retreat to my first statement is that when things like storms and tsunamis and earthquakes and then wars and tumults, they come along and they're signs that show us that this world is not going to last forever, that terrible things happen all the time, and I should be prepared and awake to be watched for the Lord, which leads us into the next section. Let's read the next section. So 32, but concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard and keep awake, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you all, I say to you all, stay awake. Okay? So, thought process here. Why do you think the Son doesn't know? Anybody have a guess as to why Jesus doesn't know the last day? That's a funny, I never thought of that as a funny thought. I hadn't thought about that, yeah. I think we look at the roles of creation, right? So what does the Father do? The Father creates. And the Son, what does he do? He redeems. He redeems all of creation, including you. What does the Spirit do? This is straight from catechism class. What does the Spirit do? The Spirit sanctifies or keeps holy the church on earth and the people that are part of that church. Right? There's 3 roles of the Trinity. So if the Father is the creator, then the judgment or the idea that this thing will be handed back over to him makes sense. And also makes sense that the Son doesn't need to know because the Father ultimately is going to be the one who decides. By the way, it also shows, what about Jesus? Jesus doesn't seem to want to know. He doesn't know. He doesn't need to know, whatever. What does it show us about Jesus? Great humility. He's on par with his Father. He has the same substance and powers and abilities as his Father, and yet he doesn't need to know. He doesn't know. And it doesn't bother him. So here's something that maybe we can all learn from. Jesus submits to his Father. He's willing to let his Father have control of things that he's not in control of, and he's the Son of God. So if he can do that, maybe we could learn from him and not necessarily have to be in control of everything, know everything. Maybe we could be humble and realize, too, that being in submission and being humble to people is actually a trait of Jesus, right? It's not a bad thing to be in submission. As Jesus says, those of you who want to be the greatest, you must be the least. It's not terrible to be weak. It's not terrible to be the least. Now, weak doesn't mean, that you give up your masculinity, guys, or anything like that. That's not what we're talking about. But it is an apostolic kind of life where we go out and we live and we preach and we say the truth, and we're at the whims of the world and what it's going to do to us. Right? The apostles preached the gospel unadulterated, and they knew that it might be the end of them, and they didn't care. We serve God rather than men. Yeah? It's not necessarily weak, it's just being humble and being in submission to God's greater ends and his greater goals. Okay? So what does it do to the faith or the perception of the church when you make predictions that don't come through? Yeah, we lose a ton of credibility. I wish people would just stop doing this stuff. It's terrible. It's so bad for the church, and it's so bad for, not that that kind of thing is going to convince people to be Christians, but it surely is a stumbling block, isn't it? When you see people who know the Scripture this well, and they claim to know something, and then they make a guess and an estimation, and it doesn't work out, it's not good for the church, right? And so neither should we make predictions when the Lord will come, because it may not be right, and we may do damage to the church. I always ask this to my confirmation kids. I'm curious what you will think. Is it good to know the day of your death? Okay, good. I'm glad you guys are saying no. Why is it not good to know the day of your death? Right. Someone else? That's a good answer. I heard some other people say. Say it louder. Yes. Yeah, I think that's kind of what Gail was saying. Is I think you'd sit in your house either depressed or terrified every day. It's this looming thing that just would absolutely control your life, would control everything that you think. It would be a terrible thing to know the day of your death. So, likewise, is it good to know the day of judgment? No, it's not good to know. In fact, I think literally, when you really start to think about it, knowing the date or being completely oblivious to anything happening at the end, both of those are poles at either side of the argument, right? So I can either know when it's going to happen or I can know nothing about it. And either one of those is dangerous, and it doesn't work. What's the best thing is to be in the middle where I know it's coming, but I don't know the time or date. Because that'll put me in a state of perpetual readiness. Anybody here served? Isn't that a kind of an idea, like being perpetually ready for anything all the time? So in a soldier sense, so the church militant, we should always be ready for that last day. Always be ready. So my question would be, what kind of things do we do to be ready? Be in the Word. Now, being here in the Word is good, but also being in the Word on your own or in small group Bible studies or in other Bible studies. The more you can be in the Word for yourself, the better you will be prepared for whatever the devil has to throw at you or whatever is going to come on the last day. So being in the Word, what else? What other things prepare you for the end to be in a perpetual state of readiness? How do you get into a perpetual state of readiness? Pray, absolutely. Being in constant contact with God and communication with Him, just talking to Him. I think, if there is some value to being in church and hearing the proclamation of the gospel, having an outside observer saying things to you that maybe you wouldn't think of on your own or you wouldn't think to say it. Sometimes your pastor's going to critique you, and because maybe we're a little blind to our blind spots, we might not be willing to critique ourselves in the same way. And we want to be free of these vices that are going to make us not prepared. So sometimes the hearing of the proclamation of the law is a way in which we could be prepared for the judgment that is coming. Yeah? Well, let me ask you this. What does sleeping look like? Jesus talks about in the parable this the doorkeeper. He's kind of found sleeping. Well, in the context, so Jesus obviously using a metaphor here. What does sleeping theologically, sleeping in preparation for the end, what does that look like? So we can avoid it. Say that again louder. Being lax in our faith, absolutely. So just kind of treating it like it's not a big deal, right? Coming when I feel like it, or believing the things I want to believe, just whatever, it's fine. We all go to heaven, and everything's fine, no big deal. I'll put my coexist sticker on the back of my car, and everything will be fine. Well, probably not, but you can think that. What else? What does sleeping look like? I think sleeping looks very much like being obsessed with things of this fleshly world. And I just mean fleshly, I mean like earthly experiences, right? Whether it's sports or it's or as outdoors things, or whatever the thing might be. Like maybe it's some people really love adventure, right? Like, or travel, or maybe it's money, right? The trappings of the world, being obsessed. I think that would be asleep at the wheel because you're completely caught up in that stuff and not the stuff that matters. Any other thoughts? What does sleeping look like? Oh, that's a really good point. That's a very good point. Yep, absolutely. I'm sad to say I have an uncle like this who is very convinced that he's going to do church stuff the last year of his life. And I said, well, I hope you picked that last year really well, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble. I mean, he thinks he can just put it off till the very, very end. And that's a mistake. Will, go ahead. Oh, Will, that is actually that is a profound thing. You're right. How can you do it at the end when you've never done it's working a muscle you've never worked your entire life? How do you think you're going to flex it then? You're not going to be able to. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. I think sleeping also looks a little bit like atheism or agnosticism, where you just completely deny that God's real or that these things are a problem. You just kind of ignore it. That's sleeping at the wheel too. Yeah. Unfortunately. Okay. Any final comments or concerns? Any final thoughts? Okay. Well, we're going to start off then with chapter 14 next week. And we'll walk with Jesus on his Passion Road during Lent. Don't forget we have Ash Wednesday services on Wednesday. And don't forget there's a half-nighter tonight at the church for all the youth group people. So that's going to be a lot of fun. They'll be going till late, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. Let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever.